Let's open our Bibles to Psalm 33. Psalm 33. Hope everybody has enjoyed some good July 4th celebrations and eating and fireworks, and we actually had some fireworks at our house Friday night. Is that right? It was Friday night, okay. And appreciate all that, enjoyed it. Psalm 33 is a tremendous psalm. We're going to read down to verse 12, which would be our sort of theme verse for today, passage. Verse 1 says, "Rejoice in the Lord, O ye righteous, for praise is comely for the upright. Praise the Lord with harp, sing unto him with the psaltery and an instrument of 10 strings. Sing unto him a new song, play skillfully with a loud noise." Hope we'll be doing some of that today. "For the word of the Lord is right, all his works are done in truth. He loveth righteousness and judgment. The earth is full of the goodness of the Lord. By the word of the Lord were the heavens made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. He gathereth the waters of the sea together as an heap. He layeth up the depth in storehouses. Let all the earth fear the Lord. Let all the inhabitants of the world stand in awe of him. For he spake, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast. The Lord bringeth the counsel of the heathen to naught. He maketh the devices of the people of none effect. The counsel of the Lord standeth forever, the thoughts of his heart to all generations. Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he hath chosen for his own inheritance." Now, it's my hope and intention that verse 10 will be carried out to some degree today. The Lord bringeth the counsel of the heathen to naught. He maketh the devices of the people of none effect. And that we'll see that a lot of the so-called history of the United States is nothing but propaganda. Verse 12, "Blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord, and the people whom he hath chosen for his own inheritance." So, since my youth was in public schools, first through the 12th grade, I've never really heard the history of the United States much. But since my youth, there's been a tremendously increased attack upon and denial of the role of Christianity in the founding of the United States. And I think that greatly increased in 2006 when President Barack Obama made a series of declarations about the religious character of the United States. And I'll quote a few of those. "The United States is no longer a Christian nation. We do not consider ourselves a Christian nation. Since its founding, the United States has been enriched by Muslim Americans. Islam has been a part of America's story." Now, I think Obama was careful about his specific words, but I think it's also clear that he wanted to downplay the role of Bible Christianity in our nation and, I guess, replace it with Islam, both in our nation's founding and in its future. Islam did play a small portion in the early part of our nation when the Barbary pirates were accosting and robbing our ships and so forth. And Thomas Jefferson sent, he was president then, he sent the first Marines to take care of that, and they did. And so that's what the shores of Tripoli are about. It's about Islam, Barbary pirates trying to rob us and steal our goods and so forth. Of course, yesterday celebrated our 250th anniversary. I'm glad that we currently have a president who, though he's not born again, he does try to promote Christianity. Maybe the Lord, secondly, he promotes himself, number one. Maybe Christianity is number three, but he promotes the United States. And I'm thankful to that, but I do remember that there was a king in the book of Acts, Acts chapter 12, who promoted himself, and it says he was eaten with worms after doing that. So I think we ought to pray for our president that he would be careful about promoting himself above the Lord. And what we want to do is promote the Lord today. Even more and more, I'm realizing how ignorant I am of the role that Bible Christianity played in the United States and its founding, its shaping. And so we're going to try to help change that. The Bible certainly gave the political principles for our government and for our culture and for our laws. And we think about how lawless our society is today, but and therefore I'd have to say that President Trump is wrong about our nation being greater now than it ever has been. But part of that's one reason I don't like to travel out of the United States, because as bad as our country is, it has some foundations that the great majority of nations in the world do not have. The impact of the Bible's influence in Christianity was produced. I can't really say that it's the greatest nation in the world because I don't know that much. But I would say the foundation produced almost a unique nation in world history that I'm aware of. Certainly Israel had the greatest glory of God of any nation that's ever existed back, not now certainly, but in the past, during Bible times. But our founding governmental documents obviously do not explicitly say nor require that U.S. citizens embrace Christianity. And yet I believe that the very foundation and the fabric of our nation come from the Bible. And so though the United States of America has granted its citizens a limited right of religious liberty. Now, why do I say that? Well, because if your religion teaches human sacrifice, that's not accepted. So it's not complete religious liberty, and I'm thankful for that. But it's kind of set in the framework of Christianity, that religious liberty. And so I believe its foundations were laid upon the religion taught in the New Testament, and our nation's future success and its existence, very existence, are dependent upon the honoring of the Lord Jesus Christ and the continued pursuit of the Great Commission by its churches and its citizens. When we talk about the foundation of the United States, we try to each Thanksgiving point out some of the truth about that event. Its initial beginning with the Pilgrims. Just to review briefly, the Pilgrims were Protestants, but they had gotten tired of their Protestant government. Most of the Reformation in the 1500s was people rebelling against the Catholic Church and wanting to have their own Catholic churches, basically. I'll tell you what I mean by that. But the Roman Catholic Church was apostate. It was entirely wicked. It was man-centered. And there are people that did read the Bible and study it. But basically what the Reformation nations did was although they broke away from Catholicism, was they started their own state churches. And so when I use that term today, I won't be talking about North Carolina or whatever, or Virginia or Georgia. I'll be talking about a government-run church. And that's what happened in England. So they left the Roman Catholic Church, or they rebelled against it, but they started the Anglican Church. The head of the Anglican Church was not Jesus Christ, but the king. And that led to prosecution of anybody that wanted to start their own independent Bible-believing church. Now, the Pilgrims are called that because that is a synonym to the word separatist. They were called separatists and pilgrims, and they wanted to have their own services, their own marriages, and so forth. And the outcome of that is the Anglican Church persecuted them. And, they went to Holland for a while, moved some over there, but then Holland didn't really have a Christian foundation at all for their nation, so they left and then got on those 3 boats. By today, you wouldn't want to call them a ship. But 2 of them had to turn back, but the Mayflower made it here to up north. They were kind of heading for the Virginia, where there's already another settlement started. But when they got there to the New World, before they left that boat, they wrote up a form of government called the Mayflower Compact. And that really was used to form, to kind of give part of the groundwork for the United States Constitution. But they were an English colony, Of course, the Pilgrims were known for their godly living, for their prayer, certainly for the Thanksgiving. It would be the most well-known thing. And then there were, in the other colonies, as people came from Europe primarily, and England and so forth, and they settled, they started their own state churches. Each of the colonies did. Here in North Carolina, it was the Episcopal Church, which is just American Anglicanism. And also the Presbyterians in North Carolina had favor with the British government. And so some of you have done a lot of, or some study and reading about Orange County and the regulators and so forth. At that time, Orange County was about 5 times bigger than it is now. Alamance was part of Orange County and the others around. And there was a lot of political philosophy that was passing, it was changing in the world at that time, from thinking about kings and so forth to self-rule, basically. And that really caught fire in the United States. But they still, as far as the church model, they believed in universal church, most all of them. So they started state churches. They governed and fined people if they didn't follow the rules of the colony. And the only place where that was not true was in Rhode Island. And that was because there were a larger number of Baptists in Rhode Island. And so they didn't have a state church. But there was a lot of people came. The Wesleys came to Georgia, and they preached the gospel to the Indians there, and there was evangelization going all over the place. Certainly the Pilgrims sought to evangelize the Indians that they were in contact with and had good a relationship with. But particularly in the Northeast, there were a lot of the colonies there and so forth were Congregationalist. And so when people got saved and they wanted to start their own church, they were not allowed to baptize. They had to have state interference in their marriages and so forth. You had to go to a congregational church to have that done. And so when George Whitefield came to the United States, he'd been preaching in England with the Wesleys. He was a Wesleyan or a Methodist, but I don't know if he's the only one like this, but he was a Calvinist Methodist. And so he's had some odds with the Wesleys, but he's preached all over New England, and there were thousands of people being saved. But he found out he had a problem, and he's famous among Baptists for this quote. He said, "All my chickens are become ducks." In other words, people were reading the Bible after they got saved, and they were becoming Baptists. They believed instead of infant baptism, they were baptizing converts. And one of those people was a guy named Shubal Stearns. He got converted under Whitefield's preaching, and he and his brother-in-law, I think there were about 12 of them that traveled down from New England through Virginia. They were going to stay there for a while, but they came on and settled over there in Liberty, North Carolina. There's a creek there, and they started a church called Sandy Creek Baptist. And they, like in other areas in our state and other states, they had opposition from the British governor because they were a Baptist. And in a short period of time, that church, I mean, you know how big Liberty is. Has everybody been to Liberty? It's just one of our little North Carolina towns. In fact, it's little. I don't even think it has a courthouse in the middle of the town, does it? That means it's really small, because all those little North Carolina towns have that. But in a short period of time, they had 600 members. One of the things if you go there to the old building now, it's not an original building. It was their church building burnt down in, I think, was it right before the 1900s? I think it was in 18 something. And so they built that little kind of cube-shaped log building. But the balcony apparently was for slaves that they still, of course, at that time it would have already changed, but 600 people, and I looked on the census of that time in the 1700s, and it says that in all of Orange County, the massive middle section of North Carolina, there were 1,400 people. Now, what I believe probably, I don't know, I tried to find this out, was that those were actual counted citizens. I mean, if you had land, if you were not a slave, it wouldn't have counted slaves, but blacks and whites both attended the church there. So I mean, how could you have 600 out of 1,400? That's close to 50%, so I know that couldn't have been right. But the Battle of Alamance, I grew up in Alamance County. Probably a lot of you have been there, but some of these issues of taxation and particularly the control of churches caused people to kind of form their militias and so forth. They called themselves the Regulators. A lot of you know there were 6 hung up here in Hillsborough. That was the county, the county seat. But eventually, war broke out between the true Americans and the British Americans, those that, and so they called them regulators, and the British governor sent armed forces over there. Particularly, he specifically told them to go down and wipe out the Baptists in Liberty. I read a book, some of a book. It was written by a professor at Wake Forest in 1920-something. And he said that at that time, the area around Liberty was the largest population of Baptists anywhere in the world. And you got to figure people walked or rode in wagons, who knows how many miles just to go to church there. But so when that happened, the church went down to, I think, 17 or something like that. But they had already been sending preachers all over the Southeast. And that continued, particularly during that persecution around the Revolutionary War. And as a result of that, a guy named Titus Lane went over to Gray, Tennessee, started Buffalo Ridge Baptist Church. Somebody went up to Portsmouth, Virginia, and started Court Street Baptist Church. That's the church my dad grew up in. And this was happening all over. If you go there to Sandy Creek, there's a big monument that the Baptist historians have put up. The regular church, there's a regular church there or whatever, is a Southern Baptist church. And the guy told me, I've talked with the pastor several times there. I believe he knows the Lord, but he told us one of the first times I went there, he said, I just don't understand it, but we don't ever have any Southern Baptists come here. He said, all we have is Independent Baptists. He said, I just don't understand that. But what happened was, and that monument states that there were thousands actually of churches that came directly from Sandy Creek. They sent out churches like Buffalo Ridge, Court Street Baptist. They then sent out missionaries all over the Southeast. And a lot of those churches were, you might have one man pastoring 2 or 3 churches. He was called a circuit riding church. They would go and preach maybe 2 or 3 places on Sunday or every other. They'd go one place this Sunday, one place the next Sunday. And the result of that is what people have called the Bible Belt in the United States. The problem, though, is even though they were local church oriented, the thinking, a lot of the thinking is, well, they got together, the preachers got together in North Carolina under Shubal Stearns for fellowship, but eventually it became the Southern Baptist Convention. And the result of that is a convention there is no such thing as a convention or a denomination in the Bible. And you get people in power and you start schools, and then the schools and the convention have all the control. So much so that, a few years ago the convention had a split between the liberals and what are called conservatives. Today, the conservative portion of the Southern Baptist Convention is Calvinist, basically. And so there's all these little Baptist churches all over North Carolina, in every town, maybe 3 or 4 in every little town. But a lot of them are they're just dead at this point. So again, Sandy Creek's in a lot of those churches, preachers, and not just in North Carolina. We're talking about all over the Southeast. Like I said, Tennessee, Virginia, and I think it was Fredericksburg, Virginia. We're going to hear, is it Fredericksburg? Yeah. Andrew's going to deliver a speech by Patrick Henry. There were 3 Baptist preachers that were arrested there for preaching the gospel. And Patrick Henry rode, how many miles? 50 miles on horseback, to defend him in court, and he won the case. They let him go. But it was this oppression of people, and particularly in religion, that you never hear about. I never heard about that in school. But there were the British government, the British Empire, they had colonies all over the world. May have been the largest empire in the history of the world. But certainly had the most powerful navy and so forth. The American folks wanted some freedom, and they wanted religious freedom in particular. And so eventually, I noticed none of you said you've been to Williamsburg, so you may know some of this, or maybe actually went to a Christian school that taught some of this. But it led to the Declaration of Independence. And I've read people that referred to our Revolutionary War as rebellion, and it was, but it was a just rebellion. It was a just war. And so the Declaration of Independence makes this clear, so I'm going to ask Kathy to read that for us at this point.
When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, a decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience has shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having a direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. He has refused his assent to laws, the most wholesome and necessary for the public good. He has forbidden his governors to pass laws of immediate and pressing importance, unless suspended in their operation till his assent should be obtained. And when so suspended, he has utterly neglected to attend to them. He has refused to pass other laws for the accommodation of large districts of people, unless those people would relinquish the right of representation in the legislature, a right inestimable to them and formidable to tyrants only. He has called together legislative bodies at places unusual, uncomfortable, and distant from the depository of their public records, for the sole purpose of fatiguing them into compliance with his measures. He has dissolved representative houses repeatedly for opposing with manly firmness his invasions in the rights of the people. He has refused for a long time, after such dissolutions, to cause others to be elected, whereby the legislative powers, incapable of annihilation, have returned to the people at large for their exercise, the state remaining in the meantime exposed to all the dangers of invasion from without and convulsions within. He has endeavored to prevent the population of these states, for that purpose obstructing the laws of naturalization of foreigners, refusing to pass others to encourage their migrations hither, and raising the conditions of new appropriations of lands. He has obstructed the administration of justice by refusing his assent to laws for establishing judiciary powers. He has made judges independent on his will alone for the tenure of their offices and the amount and payment of their salaries. He has erected a multitude of new offices and sent hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. He has kept among us in times of peace standing armies without the consent of our legislatures. He has affected to render the military independent of and superior to the civil power. He has combined with others to subject us to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws, giving his assent to their acts of pretended legislation. For quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for protecting them by a mock trial from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for imposing taxes on us without our consent, for depriving us in many cases of the benefits of trial by jury, for transporting us beyond seas to be tried for pretended offenses, for abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies, for taking away our charters, abolishing our most valuable laws, and altering fundamentally the forms of our governments, for suspending our own legislatures and declaring themselves invested with power to legislate for us in all cases whatsoever. He has abdicated government here by declaring us out of his protection and waging war against us. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coast, burnt our towns, and destroyed the lives of our people. He is, at this time, transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages, and totally unworthy the head of a civilized nation. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. He has excited domestic insurrections amongst us and has endeavored to bring on the inhabitants of our frontiers the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. In every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince, whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant, is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. Nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and consanguinity. We must, therefore, acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We, therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress, assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do in the name and by authority of the good people of these colonies solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states, they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, establish commerce, and to do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. Signed by order and in behalf of the Congress, John Hancock, President.
So again, this is a record. There were, I forget how many copies that were printed and sent all over places, so it'd be known that the Great Britain had violated its own laws, again, persecuted. They called him, the king, a tyrant and so forth. But if you could imagine if our government sent troops to your house and you had to feed them, house them, and all that, that's what they were doing, like taxing the churches, and on the things that they list here. There were 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence. 3, I know for certain, were preachers, ministers, or whatever. But of the 56, 29 of those men attended a Bible college or a Bible institute. They went to schools where they were established for preparing men for the ministry. And so they had to put together a constitution. And at that time, of course, Thomas Jefferson was from Virginia. George Mason was from Virginia. And they were key men playing a role in all this. But there was another guy that had more popularity, and that was a Baptist pastor named John Leland. And he made it known that unless they had a statement not about permission of religion, but freedom of religion, that they would oppose it. Actually, Leland was running for office, and he was apparently way ahead of George Mason as far as the votes that he would have had. So he agreed with Jefferson and Mason, the pastor did, that he would drop out if they would come up with an amendment to the Constitution that had been drawn up that recognized, didn't guarantee, because they said they had no right to, it's a recognized that freedom of religion is proper and right. So he did drop out, and so that's where the First Amendment came from. But people don't realize it was this starting of independent churches, particularly Baptist churches, that began to shape. Of course, England was supposed to be, a Christian nation, so to speak, but there's all over the country churches that have been started. The Southern Baptist Convention, again, which is basically apostate now, but it's has been for a long time the largest denomination in the United States. But as a result of those, they started schools. Churches started schools, and you probably understand that Duke, Wake Forest, Harvard, Princeton, Yale, all the totally woke schools now were all started to train men to be preachers, to be pastors. And so there weren't any other colleges or universities, basically, other than those. And so this kind of thing is what happened all over the United States. But that emphasis continued. Again, the First Amendment says this: Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or of abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. And that's played a tremendous role in our nation up till Obama's presidency, when they restricted the freedom of assembly and churches to worship and so forth. You have another handout. I meant to count these, but if you will, these constitutions, state constitutions, and I'm guessing it's close to 50. But the earliest ones would have been there's Georgia's 1777. We, the people of Georgia, relying upon the protection and guidance of Almighty God, do ordain and establish the Constitution. One of the latter ones, of course, had been Hawaii, right below that in 1959. You think about Hawaii, that's a pretty godless state. But notice what their preamble says, written 2 years after I was born. We, the people of Hawaii, grateful divine guidance, establish this Constitution. Not as clear as some of the others, but every single one of them appeals to the wisdom and the grace and the mercy of God in the establishment and ruling of their states. So why is it that all I've ever heard in school that all these men, that basically there wasn't a lot of Christianity, but they were deists? The first Supreme Court Chief Justice was a guy named John Jay. He co-authored some of the Federalist Papers. They basically tell what recorded the debates and so forth about government. He said this: Providence, this is the first Supreme Court Justice, the Chief Justice, Providence has given to our people the choice of their rulers, and is their duty as well as the privilege and interest of our Christian nation to select and prefer Christians for their rulers. So Chief Supreme Court Justice said it's a Christian nation and we ought to be voting for Christians. Thomas Jefferson, who was not a Christian, he kind of marked up the Bible, but he learned actually the idea that it had for a Republican government. Of course, there were other republics in history, but not like ours. The Republican government came from him watching. He used to attend a Baptist church that met in the Capitol building, and I guess first it was Philadelphia, but then in Washington. He watched how they conducted their business, and that's where that idea came from, a Baptist church. But he said this. Now think about this. This is a man who's not a saved man. God, who gave us life, gave us liberty. Can the liberties of a nation be secure when we have removed a conviction that these liberties are the gift of God? Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever. So he's saying Americans aren't giving God his due, and he's going to judge us. This is the one thing, too, you'll read about George Washington. Said he was a private man in his religion and so forth. Well, and they said he was, Anglican, Episcopalian, and he was attended Episcopalian churches for a lot of time. But there's a very famous picture of him being baptized by a Baptist. He requested the guy that was the chaplain for his army. He requested he baptize him because he came to understand better what the Bible teaches about that. John, I don't know how you pronounce his name, Gano, it's Gano or Gano or something. Anyway, he baptized George Washington on a military campaign. But this is what George Washington said. Now think about this. He said, the hand of providence, this is 1778, the hand of providence has been so conspicuous in all this that he must be worse than an infidel that lacks faith, and more than wicked that has not gratitude enough to acknowledge his obligations. So he's saying if you don't recognize the work and operation of God in this, you're worse than an infidel. And then in 1892, the Supreme Court was trying a case. It was Holy Trinity versus United States. A church had hired some people, and they were being, I don't know, they didn't do the taxes or something like that. It was a employment law. But the Supreme Court Justice David Josiah Brewer said in the case that the United States is a Christian nation. And as a result of that case, that was part of the ruling, he wrote a book. It was a series of lectures. The title of the book was The United States, a Christian Nation. That was in 1905. And, I wish we could go through. If you read some of the World War II military accounts, you will read about generals like Patton and others who they made their military decisions based on prayer. And they had, Patton he was a profane man, but he would call in the chaplain and they'd have prayer meetings and stuff like that before they made these military decisions. And that kind of thing is all throughout our history. Congress, I think they still have prayer. It's amazed when they pray, the lightning doesn't strike them. But, up until recently, all of our presidents were sworn into office by placing their hand on the Bible. So to say that these men who talked about God intervening, that they were deists, that's what a deist God doesn't do. He's just up there, he created everything, he's just letting it go on. It's so totally contrary to everything that they say that is true. Now, well, these are the things that are essential, and I'm going to talk about real quickly. If we're going to have God's future blessing, this is what we must continue to have. It's not any president or government bowing down to Christianity, but we need churches who carry out the Great Commission. The Great Commission is evangelizing, baptizing, and instructing so that that church will continue to do the same thing over and over and over. In the starting of a church, that's what Sandy Creek did. That's what happened in Acts. Basically, what happened in Sandy Creek is perhaps a little smaller version of what happened in Jerusalem after Pentecost. They were persecuted. They went all over the world that they knew at that time. They started other churches. The Bible example of that is the church at Antioch, Acts 13. Paul and Barnabas and other men, they had, 6 or 8 pastors. And they sent out Paul and Barnabas and others to all over the world, all over Europe, starting churches. They ordained pastors. They sent out and started other churches. The 7 churches in the book of Revelation came about that way. Secondly, Americans have to have a godly testimony. 1 Peter 1, 13 through 16. And in chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, chapter 5 of 1 Peter is talking about how Christians are to conduct themselves under persecution. And the key thing is having a godly testimony. One of the biggest reasons that people don't want to go to church is because they know people who profess to be Christians and there's no godly character. They use profanity, they lie, they steal, they don't work at work and stuff like that. They're immoral. So there's got to be a godly testimony. Third, we have to pursue the perfect will of God. Romans 12 talks about presenting our bodies as a living sacrifice. We have an example of that through the book of Acts. Acts 4, all through there, it tells how they were persecuted. They were arrested. They went back to the church. They prayed. And they said, God, give us boldness, and on and on. There has to be faithful intercession for political leaders. The Bible doesn't say anything about overthrowing a government. It says we ought to pray for our leaders, 1 Timothy. And that's the key to peace, it says. 1 Timothy chapter 2, verses 1 through 6. I do believe there is a proper time to overthrow a government. But I'm just saying, Jesus and the apostles didn't do that. Fifth, we have to produce and rear children in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. How can we maintain a Christian testimony in the United States if we don't see our children saved and grow up and live for the Lord? And then there has to be the opposition to evil and support of truth, including the election of wise political leaders. One of the greatest deliverances of God's people is in Esther. And it all started because one man wouldn't bow before a wicked man in government. Haman, Mordecai wouldn't bow before him. Well, that causes persecution, but then God delivered him. And a woman, his niece, risked her life to stand up for God's people. In Exodus 32, there was great wickedness going on there in Israel. And Moses said, who's on the Lord's side? And they actually slaughtered a bunch of idolaters in the nation of Israel. One of the last examples of standing against wickedness is when John the Baptist said to Herod, it's not right for you to marry your brother's sister. And of course that cost him his life eventually, but he was doing what Christians ought to do, speak out against evil and wickedness. Christian that doesn't vote, I believe they're guaranteeing that our nation has become more and more wicked. Anyway, so that's it for morning. You're dismissed until a few minutes here, and we'll start back up again.